You are not the author of most of your choices. Frey and Gregg's experiments with people on the invisible hand in your head. Have you ever done something and, a week later, wondered who that person was? We like to believe we are the authors of our own choices, calm, consistent, in control. A book built on 28 psychology experiments says otherwise. It says the person you think you are is, much of the time, a story your brain tells after the fact. The book is Experiments with People, Revelations from Social Psychology by Kurt Frey and Aiden Gregg. Kurt Frey is an adjunct professor of psychology who earned his doctorate at Purdue. Aiden Gregg is an associate professor at the University of Southampton with a doctorate from Yale. Together, they assembled 28 classic studies, each a controlled experiment that quietly overturns a comfortable assumption about who we are. The through line is simple and a little humbling. Who we are is far more malleable than we like to believe, and the situation, not just character, is often calling the shots. Part 1. You don't know why you do what you do. The place to start is the most uncomfortable study in the book, and one of the most famous in all of psychology, cognitive dissonance. Leon Festinger and his co-researcher James Carl Smith ran it in 1959. They paid college students to do something mind-numbingly boring, turning pegs on a board again and again. Then they asked the students to lie to the next person, saying the task had been fun. Here's the twist. One group was paid $20 for the lie, good money at the time. The other group was paid just $1. Common sense says the $20 group should feel better about it. They were paid well. But the result flipped. The $1 group, when asked privately how they really felt, convinced themselves the task had genuinely been interesting. The $20 group shrugged and said, it was boring, but they were paid to say otherwise. Why? The $20 students had an external excuse. The $1 students had no excuse big enough, so their own minds manufactured one. To kill the discomfort of having lied for almost nothing, the brain quietly rewrote the experience. The task must have been worthwhile after all. That is cognitive dissonance, and it shows we don't fix our behavior to match our beliefs. We fix our beliefs to match our behavior. The book pairs this with a second study, Effort Justification. In 1959, Elliot Aronson and Judson Mills put people through a painful, embarrassing initiation to join a discussion group, then let them listen to the most boring conversation on record. The people who suffered most to get in rated the group as far more valuable. The same mechanism. When we pay a high price for something, we convince ourselves it was worth it. This is why the book opens a whole chapter on a chilling idea. We are strangers to ourselves. Ask people why they chose a job, a partner, a belief, and they'll give you a confident, logical answer. The experiments say that answer is usually a story written after the decision, not the reason for it. And it explains a truth you can feel in your own life. Think of the person who stays in a bad relationship long after it has soured. Not because the other person is wonderful, but because admitting it was a mistake would be too painful. So the mind beautifies the suffering. We rationalize what we can't bear to call a loss. Part 2, put us in a crowd and the self disappears. If part 1 is about the stories we tell ourselves, part 2 is about what happens when the situation gets loud. The book walks through 3 experiments that escalate from unsettling to chilling. First, conformity. In 1951, Solomon Asch showed people a simple line-matching task alongside a group of strangers who were secretly in on the study. On some rounds, the group gave an obviously wrong answer. About 3/4 of ordinary people went along with the group at least once. On average, they agreed with a wrong answer about 1/3 of the time. Not because they were stupid, but because the pull to belong is that strong. Then the Bystander Effect. In 1964, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her New York apartment, and for nearly half an hour, neighbors heard or saw something, and not one came down, not one called the police. That case horrified the public into calling those neighbors cold and heartless. Psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané suspected something deeper. In 1968, they staged an emergency and measured who helped. When a subject thought they were the only one who could hear the cry for help, about 85% rushed to act. When they believed others were listening too, only about 31% did. Nobody got crueler. Responsibility just spread so thin across the crowd that no single person felt it. The most infamous study in the book is Milgram's obedience experiment. In 1963, Stanley Milgram had ordinary volunteers press a button that they believed delivered a dangerous electric shock to a stranger in the next room every time the stranger answered wrong. The stranger screamed. The stranger begged. The stranger eventually went silent. And a calm man in a white coat said, "The experiment requires that you continue." About 2/3 of the volunteers kept going all the way to the highest, supposedly lethal voltage. The lesson the book draws isn't that people are monsters. It's that we badly overestimate our own independence. The situation, a group, a diffuse crowd, a man in a white coat, does more of the steering than we ever admit. And here's the practical gift the book leaves us. If you're ever in real danger, don't just shout for help. Point at one person, look them in the eye, and say, "You, in the blue shirt, call the police now." The moment responsibility lands on a single named human, the better angel shows up. And when you feel the crowd pulling you towards something you know is wrong, picture the white coat and ask the only question that matters. If no one were watching and no one had ordered me, what would I do? The answer to that question, when you're alone with it, is the real you. Part 3. The quiet ways we break our own children. Part 3 turns to the people we love most and the ways good intentions backfire. The first study is the hidden cost of rewards. In 1973, Mark Lepper, David Green, and Richard Nisbett watched young children who loved to draw. They split them into groups. One group was promised a reward for drawing. Another got a surprise reward with no promise. The third got nothing. Weeks later, the children who had been promised a reward had lost interest in drawing. The ones who drew for the joy of it or who got a surprise kept going. The reason is the Overjustification Effect. The child who drew for a prize stopped drawing for the love of it. The reward crowded out the inner drive. The book's warning to every parent is sharp. When you pay a child to learn, you're quietly teaching them that learning is work, and work is something you only do for pay. Protect the inner spark. Praise the line they drew, not the prize they earned. The companion study is the self-fulfilling prophecy. In 1968, Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson told teachers that certain students were about to bloom intellectually, based on nothing. The students were picked at random. By the end of the year, those randomly chosen children had pulled ahead. Not because they were special, but because the teachers, expecting greatness, treated them as if they were great, and the children rose to meet it. The book frames this as behavioral confirmation. We get from people roughly what we expect, because our expectations quietly shape how we treat them, which shapes who they become. For a parent, that's the equal and opposite of the overjustification trap. Stop narrating your child's flaws. You're not describing them. You're building them. Believe they can grow, and they often will. Part 4. Stop trying to control your own mind. The final part is the one you can use tonight. It's about a cruel trick your mind plays when you try too hard to control it. Wegner's ironic process, demonstrated in 1987, goes like this. Try not to think of a white bear. The harder you try, the more the bear appears. In the study, people told to suppress the bear ended up thinking of it about once a minute, more than people told to think of it freely. The mind runs two systems at once. One searching for the thought to push it away, and one holding the intention not to. The searching system wins, especially when you're tired, anxious, or stressed. This is why telling yourself, "Don't eat the chocolate," or "Just fall asleep already," backfires. The instruction creates the very thought you're fighting. The book's prescription is the opposite of control. Don't wrestle the thought. Give your mind a different, absorbing job. Can't sleep? Don't order yourself to sleep. Do something that demands focus. Count slowly backward from 100. Name objects in the room. Describe your day in reverse. You stop fighting the bear, and the bear gets bored and leaves. The deeper message is about how we live. Much of what eats us isn't the pressure itself, but the desperate need to control every outcome. The experiments in this book aren't a vote of confidence in the self, but they are a map of its levers. When you stop white-knuckling the wheel and let yourself be uncertain for a moment, let yourself not sleep, let yourself feel the feeling, that's when real calm arrives. Closing, read people, then choose people. On the surface, experiments with people looks like a catalog of cold labs and stranger-than-fiction results. But its real subject is you. It shows that we're suggestible, conforming, self-justifying, and far more shaped by context than we want to admit. And then it does something generous with that news. Because once you see the levers, you can use them. You can name the dissonance instead of believing the story. You can pull responsibility back to yourself instead of losing it in the crowd. You can protect a child's inner drive instead of pricing it. You can stop fighting your own mind and give it something better to do. Reading human nature isn't about becoming cynical. It's about seeing the truth and then choosing, on purpose, to be the kind of person you'd want to be when no one is watching. If experiments with people made you rethink one decision you made on autopilot, tell me in the comments. Which experiment haunts you most, the $1 lie, the silent crowd, or the shock button? I read every one.